Hello there, this is John V, Software Evangelist at JSCAPE. And today I'm going to show you how to install JSCAPE MFT Synchronizer Agent on a Windows host. Agents are used in cases wherein the remote host that you would like to synchronize with JSCAPE MFT Synchronizer doesn't have any running file transfer service whatsoever. So there's no FTPS, no SFTP, not even plain FTP or any other file transfer protocol for that matter. Agents have much smaller computing resource footprints and lower maintenance requirements than a full-blown file transfer solution. So it's really more practical to use if all you really need to do is push or pull a bunch of files to or from that remote host. Now, before you can use any instance of MFT Synchronizer Agent, you need to make sure that 1. You already have an agent object on your MFT Synchronizer instance that would later on correspond to the agent you'll be installing on the remote host, and 2. You already have the agent service enabled. So let me demonstrate how to set those up first. So the first thing we're going to do is log into our MFT Synchronizer Manager. And then we go to Agents. So the first thing we want to do is add an agent. So let's just add an agent here. We need to enter login credentials for this particular agent. So let's add a username. Let's call this agent1. And let's give it a password. Of course, your password should be stronger than what I'm entering here. And then let's just repeat that password to confirm. And then make sure that's enabled. Now remember, these values should match the values that you will later on enter into your agent username and agent password parameters when you install the agent on the remote host. Once you've taken note of that, you can now click Add. So there, our agent has just been created. Now that we have an agent object, our next step is to enable the agent service. So we go to the Service tab and then just click Edit. And so when the agent service configuration dialog appears, we can then specify the agent service parameters. First, we tick this checkbox here to enable the service. And then we specify an IP address this service will be listening on. Let's just select 0.0.0.0, which means the service will be listening on all available network interfaces. And then for the port number, 425 is the default port number the service will be listening on. You can change that if you want, but let's just leave that as is for now. Take note of that port number as you'll be needing that once you set up your agent at the remote Windows host. You can also select a key, which will be responsible for encrypting communications between MFT Synchronizer and the remote agent. Basically, you have the option to generate a new key or import an existing key. And you should really use one of these two options in a production environment. But for now, let's just leave the key to its default value. Since we're all done here, let's click Save. And there you'll see that the agent service configuration has been updated. That means our agent service is starting to listen for incoming agent requests. But right now, we don't have any agent on a remote host yet, so let's add one to our remote Windows host. But before we do that, we need to obtain the IP address of this machine we're currently working on. That's going to be the IP address of our MFT Synchronizer service. So we launch a command prompt and run ipconfig. And so as you can see, the IP address is 172.31.38.58. So now we can head out to our remote Windows host, and here I already have a browser open on www.jscape.com We're here because we still need to download the agent installer. So we go to Products, JSCAPE MFT Synchronizer, Download, and then we fill up this form and then click Download. You'll then be brought to the MFT Synchronizer download page where you can see the different installers for different platforms. Since we're using a 64-bit Windows server, let's download the 64-bit Windows installer. Once the installer has finished downloading, double-click it to launch and then follow the instructions on the screen until you get to the Agent Settings dialog. Here, you need to enter the synchronizer host/IP. This is just the IP address of our MFT Synchronizer service. Let's look at that one more time. So that's 172.31.38.58. And we enter that into our synchronizer host/IP field here. And then we just leave the port number as is. So as you can see, that's just 425. Of course, if you change that on the server side, you should also change that here. And then we enter the agent username, so that's just agent1, and then the agent's corresponding password. So we enter that here. And then for the root path, we need to specify the folder where MFT Synchronizer will be pulling files from or pushing files to. In my case, I'm going to create a new folder, and I'm going to call that folder for sync. That should fill up our root path field. Now there's a checkbox labeled Allow Native Process Execution. You'll need to tick that checkbox if you want this agent to run native commands. But we won't be running any native commands for now, so let's just leave that as is. And let's click Next, and then Finish. After clicking the Finish button, this MFT Synchronizer agent will launch automatically in the background and attempt to connect to MFT Synchronizer using the parameters you specified earlier. So if we go back to our MFT Synchronizer instance, you should see a new entry under the Service tab representing the newly installed agent on our remote Windows host. You can also view pertinent information about that agent, like the IP address and host number of the Windows host, the time the agent successfully connected with MFT Synchronizer, the version of the MFT Synchronizer agent, and the type of installation file. If you want, you can take note of that IP address, and if you go back to the remote host and run, say, ipconfig, you can verify that the IP address recorded there in fact matches the IP address of the remote host. That's it. Now you know how to install MFT Synchronizer Agent on a Windows host.